Hello guys and girls, Bored now back with you for this week's X-Files review, and this is going to be my review of the 18th episode of Season 1. It is called Miracle Man, so I think you're pretty certain on the sort of territory we're in this week by the title alone. So I will just say I will be getting into full spoilers from the outset. And a couple of things to say before I kick off this review. Firstly, man, has it been an up and down time recently on the X-Files. It does seem to follow a pattern at the moment where you'll have a really great episode, or at least a good episode, and then it'll be followed up by a really bad episode. There seems to be hardly any in-between type episodes at the moment. So I think this is a good example of that, and it definitely carries on that pattern. So for those of you who have already heard my previous review, which was of EBE, which is a big arc mythology style episode from last week, you're already going to know exactly how I feel about Miracle Man. So EBE, I was very positive on. I loved it a lot, and in fact, I put it in my top 3 so far of the season, if I remember rightly from last week. So, by contrast, this one was a bit of a dud. It sort of brought me crashing back down to earth. Just in how forgettable it was. Really, everything was just so forgettable. No real areas of interest, no intrigue, no atmosphere or interesting characters. It was just really flat, and I think it sort of committed the cardinal sin, which is almost a play on words considering we're in religious areas, but the cardinal sin, it was boring. That's the worst crime of a TV episode could be. Because when I look at this episode and think about it compared to other episodes of the X-Files so far this season, there probably are worse episodes if you're looking at it just at the story and characters and beat to beat. But the problem is some of those other episodes just had a little more going for them in terms of being quite entertaining, in terms of just the actual story. There's nothing really interesting about this story. No, nothing. Certainly, they don't turn it into anything interesting, and that's the problem. I think most episodes live or die on the execution. I think potentially that this could have been an interesting story, but they just don't do anything with it. They go for the most obvious cliches, and it's one of those you're gonna watch it and that's it. You're gonna come out of it and there's not gonna be much of a lasting impression. You'll totally forget about it like a day or two afterwards, and that's a bad sign. I'm sort of wondering if I would rewatch this one again. I probably would if I'm doing a full rewatch, but certainly it's one you could skip and you're not going to lose anything. So I should just sum up the premise, and the premise is that we open with this fire at a motel or something, and the firemen have already shown up. There's a crowd of people, and this guy is basically burnt to death. But then you've got this spooky looking boy, because is there any other kind in the X-Files episode? He's hanging about with this character who appears to be his father, and the boy is sort of spouting some religious type stuff. He's kind of chanting this weird sort of chant, and he is trying to convince the fireman that he can heal this guy, and his father, who we soon find out is a religious reverend type character. He's saying let him try. He has the gift basically, And so that's going to become the whole deal. Then this kid does have these like special sort of supernatural powers. He can heal people. So he does actually bring this guy back to life. I have to say, the fireman, considering he's got, he's telling them stay away and stuff, but he actually doesn't make that much of an effort to get these random strangers away from this dead body. But he does heal him. But then the story becomes that the adult is like a preacher, and we jump forward to some years later where it's sort of got out that this kid, who's now grown up himself, has this special talent. So they actually exploit it essentially in this small town, or that's certainly the impression that's given. That it's one of these like hokey sort of like religious type shows where people pay to get in, and he supposedly chooses someone out of the audience, and he performs a miracle. But what starts to happen is that these shows go wrong, and people actually end up dead as a result of his religious touch, if you will. And that's what alerts Mulder and Scully their attention, and they go to the town to investigate. And we sort of find out that the town itself, and particularly the town sheriff, who is very critical of them, that they're basically against this religious cult. So that becomes the mystery of the episode: is does this kid, Samuel, his name is, does he really have these healing powers, these magical powers, and is he involved in the killing of these different people, or is it someone else? And that's basically the setup. Now, just for a bit of added drama, they have to work in the angle of Mulder's sister, his missing sister, and it's during the scene where they question Samuel at like the jail, because they sort of call him in for questioning. There's been an incident in like a bar where he's actually been like assaulted and becomes the target. But they question him about what's been going on and stuff, and he starts to talk to Mulder like, I can see your pain and this kind of thing. And he brings up that he has like a missing sister. He has, or sister or brother, and this becomes a thing with Mulder in the episode. Now, with it being Mulder, he does believe that Samuel has these powers, but he becomes more kind of unsettled with this, and drawn into the whole thing. The fact that he becomes convinced at various times throughout the episodes. He has flashes of Samantha, his missing sister, and he's convinced that Samuel is somehow using his powers to make her appear to him. And it's just one example of this added on plot which we just don't need. It's just done for drama. It's very, very lame. Now, this isn't to say that I'm against them using this subplot, and because I do find it very compelling, the stuff about Mulder's sister, and it's a great motivation for him investigating the X-Files, or then that's why his passion was ignited for them. So in general, I have an interest for that side of things, but they do have a habit of like just banging you over the head with it at times. And I think in this case, it just wasn't needed. I think there was enough of a plot here already, or potential plot. And this just feels like a desperate sort of add-on trying to get attention. And it just plays out as quite sort of goofy and cheesy, the way he keeps having these visions of him, and it just feels very sort of forced the way Mulder's taken in, and as I said, it's just kind of added drama, but it's like forced sort of drama. And I think it sums up part of my issue with the episode is that it does feel like a very sort of plain, like cheesy sort of soap opera. I think a lot of the drama plays out like that between the characters. It is more, it does feel more like you're watching that sort of like daytime soap opera, and it just happens to be in an X-Files episode. The whole thing looks very sort of low rent, and the depiction of the town and the characters, like the religious figures are just like walking stereotypes. I think there's some okay acting. I think the cast are sort of doing their best, but in general, like just the depiction, it's just like this typical one note stereotypes. It's all very, from nothing to 11 the next minute, and it, I think in a way you can understand them being depicted this way to play them off as potential villains, potential threats, but at least make them interesting, at least make them kind of charismatic, and because that's the whole thing, is that they're maybe playing the town, and they're meant to be like sort of hoodlums or crooks, or at least like the Reverends and the other characters. Not so much Samuel. I think you meant to have some sympathy for him. Obviously, there's this mystery surrounding him, but I think at least make them quite complex characters where you could perhaps see their motivations, and because I think that's the part of the problem the episode Gender Bender had, is that you never really felt invested or interested in these characters. Whether you came down on the side of thinking that they're no good or not, I think you just didn't really care. They just didn't feel like interesting characters. And as I said, I think the cast are okay, but they're given very little to do. You've got Dennis Lipscomb, I think you say his name, who's like this quite well-known character actor. He's no longer around, but he was in a bunch of movies in the 80s, and he's playing like the Reverend. And he's good casting in that role, but again, I think he's totally wasted. I think the guy playing the town sheriff, he looks familiar. I've seen him in other things, but he's totally wasted as well. He's actually unlikable. They make him pretty aggressive and unlikable from the start, which actually, when you see the development and where the plot goes later on, I think is intentional. But yeah, he's not very well written. No one's really that well written. It's just a dud of a plot. I think Mulder and Scully are mediocre at best in this episode. They're not really on top form, because you don't really get the classic sort of Mulder wit. There's like one line about like a gag about Woodstock where he said, "Well, I've seen this trick once at Woodstock when I was there," or something. Scully says, "You were never at Woodstock, Mulder," and I think he makes a quip about, "Well, I imagined it," or I had a dream about it," or something like that. But that's as entertaining as the dialogue from Mulder gets in this episode. It's pretty lame. You would have thought maybe they could have come up with some good comic lines and wit to sort of make things a bit more interesting. But the whole plot is very flat. As I said, the look of the town and the atmosphere, there's just nothing there. And the way the whole thing sort of resolves itself is kind of just meh as well. I mean, the sort of like just the way it's revealed that who it is, the guy it turns out to be. It's this guy who works as like a right hand man for the Reverend, who's been involved in these killings, and it turns out that he was brought back from the dead by Samuel, but he's been left looking like the prune face character out of Dick Tracy. Basically, he looks absolutely ridiculous. When you see him, he's got like this black hat on and this like mouldy sort of face. But it turns out it's been him, and he's been doing all this to set up Samuel and frame him and stuff. And when it comes out later, and he's actually visited by the spirit of Samuel, because Samuel eventually gets killed off, ran mysteriously, but yeah, he's visited by the spirit of Samuel, which looks very bad. Like the whole depiction of the spirit and the sort of white lines around him, it looks terrible. so lame and cheap. But yeah, his motivation is just that, and it's like, come on, you could have came up with something better than that. It's all very weak. There's some bad dialogue in this as well, like where Samuel at one point says, "You mean the touch of the devil?" Yes, that's actually a line, and he delivers it in this very serious sort of deadpan typeface. It's meant to be quite sort of provocative. But yeah, it's an extremely boring episode, and I think that's, as I said, that's the worst crime. There's very little to recommend it. There's probably been worse in terms of the plot and certain things, certain like visual type things that have happened, but I think just because it is so forgettable, whereas something like Jersey Devil, which probably a lot of people criticise, I think there's at least a bit more of an intrigue to that episode, and it is quite entertaining compared with there's nothing really entertaining or that intriguing about this, and it resolves itself in a very unsatisfying way. To me, it doesn't feel enough like an X-Files episode, personally. And the stuff with Mulder's sister and him supposedly getting visions of her, I just hated. I thought that was totally insulting and lame. So, very poor. I'll give it 3 out of 10, and it's going to go in the bottom 3. It's not as bad as Ghost in the Machine. It's not as bad as Space, but it's going to go in the bottom 3. So that's pretty easy for me. And that is Miracle Man, this week's X-Files. If you disagree with me on the episode, if you actually like it, or at least don't dislike it as much as me, then let me know your thoughts in the comments below. You can like and subscribe. Also ding the bell on YouTube, and that'll notify you when a new video goes live, or when I go live on a live stream. And speaking of a live stream, and speaking of X-Files, because from time to time I do X-Files live streams, and there'll be one coming up in the next week or so, and that will be a double bill of In the Darkness. I want to say I've probably got that without looking. I might have got that that episode title wrong, but I think it's in the Darkness, the one in the forest. And after that, I'll be doing Tomb, so I'll be doing a stream of those 2 episodes back to back in the coming week or so. So look out for that on the channel. But thanks for listening, and I'll see you guys again soon. Goodbye.